Good morning, broadcasting live from the ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Thank you for joining us. You are watching Drug Haven, and today we are asking the question, have drugs made their ways into our classrooms? Now, according to an open survey done in Zimbabwe, 4 out of 5 students abuse drugs and other illegal substances without the knowledge of their parents. What are some of the reasons that they're doing this? How widespread is this problem? Today, that's what we hope to discuss, uncover, and hopefully come up with possible solutions to. Now, of course, you can be part of this discussion. If you are watching on Facebook, just drop your comments in the comment section. That's the Zimpapers TV Network Facebook page, or join us on Twitter at ZTN News and make sure that we can hear your contributions to this particular discussion. Now, joining me, I do have 2 educators. I have Dr. Tapera Chikandiwa and Tatenda Kadenge, who are joining us to kind of give us a perspective from, you know, the positions of authorities in the schools. And we have learners, Sashli, I'm hoping I said that right, Sashli? Okay, Sashli Mkurajija and Godwin Sivanda, who are also going to be telling us, you know, from the students' perspective, what is it that they're facing? What are they seeing? We don't really know what it is. They'll give us from a peer perspective. They interact with their peers. They know why their peers are doing some of these things and what they're doing. Now, gentlemen, lady, thank you so much for joining us. What do you think is the current status of drug use in schools?
Yeah, most of the students are indulging themselves in using this drug in schools. It's very unfortunate that things are not going well.
When you say things, what do you mean things are not going well? For a student, what things possibly can't be going well?
You know, whenever the student is using drugs or doing schoolwork under the influence of this substance, it really affects the performance of the student. Some of the students, if they are going, especially we deal with secondary school students, when they are starting Form 1, Form 2, you start to see changes when that student moves to ordinary level. So it really, really affects much to us.
Okay, I'll come to you.
I would like to take a very different perspective to this whole thing. I would like to disagree with the research that you maybe highlighted, the 4 out of 5. I think maybe the population used to do that survey was not quite adequate. And I think my colleague here says that most of the learners are indulging in drugs. I don't think so. I think we've got a clique of learners who are indulging in drugs. And I still believe that our parents, our communities are still very strong enough to deal with this situation, and there are still strict rules at different homes, and we don't want to exaggerate the problem. I'm aware that actually His Excellency the President is actually now in the forefront of fighting this, but we have not lost it. We have got a clique which is influencing others, and together with the police, I think we will be able to get there. So we have not yet lost much.
I don't think we're saying we've lost it. The question would really be more towards what is the extent at the moment of what we currently have to battle, because for us to be able to effectively deal with the situation, we do kind of need to have some form of perspective in terms of, when you say a clique, how big is this clique? Are we talking like here? So they've given us an example and they've said 4 out of 5. It doesn't necessarily mean that we say 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th one, you know, is the only free one. It might even be the other way around. That one in that survey may be the one that's on drugs. But we do need some kind of a scope. What are we working with? And from your experience, what are we working with? How big are these cliques?
You see, these are the peer influencers, which it becomes very difficult, maybe given the current scenario that we are under lockdown as a nation. We are not able to do a thorough research into this. But as you look with maybe if you deal with the headmasters of the schools, they give the statistics of maybe the kids they found with some of these things. It's important, but I think what we need is for us to do a deeper research to understand through the heads, through our maybe parent ministry, to understand how deep this problem is, so that we don't encourage those who are not taking to take, and also we find ways of maybe ensuring that those who are taking then are actually stopped from doing so. So I still understand that, yes, it's a deep problem that we have, but we need further research for us to be able to get to that position.
Okay, and this does serve as a platform of research as well, because
Yes,
we come up
please.
with some of these, we get a bit more information. Sashli, among your peers, what would you say, and we know it's not going to be a verified fact in terms of numbers, but what would you say is the scope of drug users among just the peers that you interact with at school?
As he has already said, 4 or 5, and I think mostly in high school, that's where it is, because once you enter high school, you're entering a different kind of world, so things, they change. So generally in high school, that's where it has mostly
Been prevalent.
Yes.
Godwin?
Well, in my own perspective, we are dealing with a catastrophic fiasco, which we have only noticed in the wee hours. And as a nation, and as Sir said, we were in a pandemic. So the drugs, as for me and my own side, I would see them as a pandemic. We, as a people, should come together and fight it.
Okay, so we all agree that it needs to be fought. But now let's look at what exactly are we fighting. What are some of the drugs that are prevalent, especially in our high schools? Sashli, what are you coming into contact with when you talk about your peers who are on drugs?
Most of the drugs that are in high school, we have marijuana, crystal meth, cocaine, and also other tablets which students use, like ecstasy. So these drugs, there are quite a number, even LSD. They're also used in high schools.
Godwin?
We have those pills, as Ashley said, and something new which is coming. Maybe people might not have seen or heard about it, but the Pampers which babies use, they have a liquid which people now use and boil it. After boiling, they filter it, remove the unwanted, and drink the substance. It's now a new thing. It's coming, and I'm giving you an insight about it.
Now, they've mentioned some of the drugs that are coming into the school system. What checks are there that are kind of making sure, well, not making sure because they are coming in, that are meant to prevent the infiltration of these drugs into our schools?
Thank you. What I feel is maybe it's a very exciting topic, like you say, we're relaxing here. I have drugs found their way into Zimbabwe schools. I would like to believe that we went to teacher training. I went to train as a teacher myself. And this has been part of our studies. Actually, we have been studying it. I think even I went to college in 1993. And Mbanje, for example, was already being used in the schools by learners. They were taking marijuana, they could smoke it. But what has happened now is that it seems as if there's been a metamorphosis, like a change in how things are done. For example, they no longer need the matches to light it up. The learners have come up with very exciting, innovative ways of doing this. But in certain schools, you're able to pick quickly that the child there's something that's abnormal about it if you've got well-trained teachers, because now they can tell you they can bake a cake, they call it a space cake, and they can actually share it in the presence of the teachers. And even they can come home and give you a share of it. But if you're taking it for the first time, you start seeing symptoms of a child who is under stress, like vomiting, like the drowsiness. If we have critical teachers or critical thinkers who know their learners, they'll be able to say that, no, this is an abnormal behavior. And if you research these young people, they always tell you. So I believe that they're now consuming these drugs in different ways. Like you were asking again, how do they take? I've got this gadget here that I've brought. You know, they put in the liquid inside here, and then it's an electronic gadget where they will fill it in with some strawberry something. You know, the different varieties. They could put in strawberry. They would put in these things here. And if you get into a bathroom at a school and then suddenly you smell strawberries. Basically, you're supposed to be asking a question, why are we having strawberries, rosemary, guavas here? Then I think we need the educators to be on the ground, to be doing what they're trained to do. And this problem here who manage it. But they,
I think that's part of what I'm asking you, though. That what are some of these checks? Because so, for example, you've shown us. I'm assuming it's a vape.
Yeah, it's a vape. Yes.
And it's a gadget that we can see, and so before it actually is brought into the school grounds, someone should have been able to have picked up that something that is not supposed to be in the school is coming in.
I picked it up through searching.
You see, so one of the methods that's there is searches. Do you have anything else that you're employing that kind of helps to stem the flow of drugs in schools?
Yes, we've put some measures to maybe to control. There is the security check, putting on 1 or 2 cameras in strategic positions as a way to try and avoid.
Okay, so we have security checks and we have the cameras. Godwin, how are people getting drugs into school?
Well, that's a tricky question, but drugs are really there in school. As a student or as a learner, I would tell you from a bigger picture. The drugs are coming in different ways. For example, using my tie, I could sneak in some marijuana in my tie, in some pills, a bottle of Bronclear, or let's say...
In your tie, a bottle of Bronclear?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's not visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Or they're just not paying attention?
Well, I wouldn't say they're not paying attention or say much things, but you never know what the learner of today is doing. It's a different thing. It's something which is wild, which needs to be controlled at an early stage.
So, okay, so you've mentioned that you could sneak it into various parts, your tie, for example. Sashli, have you seen any strange importation of drugs into the school?
Yes, but I'm going to answer from a boarding side of view.
Please do.
You see, well, in boarding schools as girls, we really love to decorate our beds. So we usually use teddy bears. Of which some students, they are now using those teddy bears to stuff in the drugs. It could be pills or marijuana, and then it is stuffed in, and then it is sold in. So the teacher or the matron who's checking, you know, they won't even try to feel the teddy bear, to feel is it really the teddy stuff or there's something else in there, or even the toilet bag, or if you do fashion and fabrics, you can put it in your housewife kit, you can even put it in your first aid box, and then the teacher is just going to say this is just a first aid box, I won't check it. Or we can use baked goods, as they said, you know, like brownies. How is a teacher going to see that there's drugs in brownies? So I would rather say we need like dogs to sniff at least the foodstuffs to check for certain drugs.
Yeah, so you want to say something?
No, actually.
So we've got, okay, so we've got the ties, we've got the teddy bears, the toiletry bags, housewife kits. Can you see that the checks are clearly not working as they should be?
No. You see, when these drugs are sneaked into the institution, right, they are consumed, right? If they are consumed, then they have an impact when they are consumed. So we need to make sure that the people who are on the ground, the teacher, must be able to understand the learner. As soon as you see that a learner is in a state that is not a normal state, you then start investigating. And these youngsters, they will tell you. For example, if you talk about diazepam, that's the blue tablet, openly on the tongue it shows. And somebody who is on it is openly high because that's a drug that's used in the labor ward.
But surely we should be stopping them from coming in before we even start to try and understand the nature of the student and the changes that occur once they've taken the drugs. Should we not be preventing the drugs from coming in the first place?
From my own research that I've collected, I think what we need to deal with is the primary cause. Why are those learners taking those drugs?
Right, actually we are coming to that.
Okay.
We do need to take a quick break, but we are looking at the situation of drugs and drug use in schools. Have drugs found their ways into our classrooms, and what can we do about it? Do we stop it from the source? Do we stop them from coming in? Do we stop it with the students who are dealing with them? Please make sure you are part of the discussion. Drop your contributions in the comments section. That is the Zim Papers TV Network Facebook page or at ZTN News on Twitter. We are taking a short break. Just stay tuned. Welcome back. You are watching Drug Haven. Now, have drugs found their way into Zimbabwe's classrooms? So far, the consensus is yes. What are your thoughts on this? How do we address the situation, and how do we make sure our students are drug-free and actually going to school for the purposes of education and not just to get high? Now, before we went to the break, you were talking about starting to address some of the causes. What are some of these causes of drug use? And I know earlier on we did mention that one of them is a whole new environment and things become different. But what are some of the other root causes of drug use, especially among students?
Yeah, maybe I will have to leave that maybe to the learners to maybe shed more light on what are the main causes why they are taking these drugs. But what I wanted to explain was we need to deal with the primary cause, because the solutions that we are thinking, especially in taking those drugs to school, the learners are also coming up with, like what the doctor had been saying, that they are now they've invented new ways of bringing them to school. So the time we are spending in maybe coming up with a solution is also the time they are also spending in trying to manipulate the system of the school.
Okay, Godwin, I will ask you, what are some of the causes of drug use in school? Why are your peers on drugs?
Well, some would say peer pressure, which everybody knows, but now this generation, as said, inventions are coming in. People are just doing drugs for fun. Some of them are just doing them for fun. Some have parents who have gone abroad. They get money at the end of the month. You have money, you're seated at home, you have nothing to do, you have a friend, you just buy drugs just for fun, as I said. You know, you're not getting the emotional support you need to get. You have this edge of just doing something which is new to you. So yeah, people are doing things which are very, very different than which was done before.
Sashley, in your experience?
My experience, the causes of drug abuse, looking at the household, there's the issue of gender-based violence. As a child, I do not want to see or even hear my mother being beaten or even see my father being abused. So I take drugs to try and take my mindset from there. And then the point of peer pressure. And then experimenting. When I get into high school, I see others doing this, and then I'm just like, let me just try it. You know, I just want to also do it. And then it also comes to a point of depression. As students, we really do get depressed, and then there's also mental illness.
Okay. Now, when you are interacting with your peers and you're having these discussions with them, I'm assuming you are able to talk to some of them a bit more openly. Obviously, not all of them. How do they get into it? How do they start? Because there has to be a point where, you know, someone, even if it's just an experiment or even if it is just for fun, there's a starting point. Where did they start, Sashley?
Others, they can start, you know, from watching from social icons or celebrities, they see that a certain celebrity doing this, and then there's like, what's that? I need to do that as well. And then others, they family influence. You have a relative who's taking a drug, and then you see them, and then they introduce you to the drug. And then we also have an issue whereby a friend in general can just say, just take this, try it, have it, without you asking or even seeing the friend taking a certain substance.
Okay, Godwin?
Yeah, as Ashley said, a friend could come and give you a certain object or a certain pill without seeing him taking it. But the main cause here is we are taking drugs as pupils or as a learner just to feel calm, just to relax, but actually without knowing it kills the future.
What does this kind of, so one of the things that they have mentioned is, as he's just said just now, is you take them to kind of feel calm in a situation. And Sashley mentioned coming from backgrounds, for some of them, of abuse and wanting to kind of numb everything else that's going on. As you mentioned, you've been through training as a teacher. What are some of the things that you should be looking out for, especially from your students? How are you reading your students? How do you start to understand a student that could possibly help you prevent them from eventually turning to drugs?
I think adolescence, understanding the adolescent is a very important concept for all of us. That's from the fathers, the mothers, and the community. They are young people who have got an identity crisis. They are confused. They don't know themselves. They're experimenting. So I think what we need to do is to maybe be able to distinguish between an adolescent behavior and a drug behavior, because it seems as if they are now running parallel to each other. Like a young lady who may be having a challenge with her period may just say, I want to sleep. So it then requires a professional to look at that, to actually say, this child last week was doing this.
The same thing.
Then today again he's doing the same thing. You communicate with the parents, because I think that's communication is very important. That's education and communication, where the parent, the school and the home become key. It becomes critical where you communicate. Was the child having a problem when they came from home? You phone. And then the mother may say, no, the child was not having a problem. Then why is it this problem here? It's coming every day at 10 o'clock. So I think if you study the adolescent behaviors and know that the adolescents they've got a crisis, yes, they are depressed, they don't know themselves. But there's need for us now as teachers in the community to be able to say, this is no longer an adolescent behavior.
Right.
And one thing that you were talking about, I think I didn't comment on that, the fact that we are having bronchlear, millions of bottles coming into the country. And how are they getting into the country? And where is the police? Where is our army? What's happening to our borders? Where is the Medical Controls Council? How is it that the kids are going to be able to go on to the counter and they can buy a cough mixture? Can we not put the cough mixtures back to the counters where you're supposed to buy with a prescription?
Right.
So I think the government must come up with statutory instruments, which is an advocacy that we're making now. Let's have instruments which prevent the availability of some of these drugs. For example, even the diazepam that I was saying, maybe they are in the home. What is the condition? How are the pills kept in the home? If a mother has the pills taken, or maybe taken by a child, what is the penalty? Because they're going to affect your child and then the other child. So what do? I think advocacy, policy changes, statutory instruments, as we support the president in fighting this.
Right. And now that you speak of penalties, are there actually any measures taken within the school system once, let's say, you've managed to catch a student either bringing in drugs for sale or even for use and distribution among their friends? Are there penalties in place for them, and what are some of those penalties? I
believe that, our country really needs to revisit its laws. For example, we have a child coming from school A, which is a private school, and according to Circular P35, you are supposed to look at this child, you're on drugs, you've been caught, and the next thing is that expulsion. So the headmasters are quick to sign, to exclude the child, to penalize the child, actually destroying the child's universal right to association, to education. If you expel a child from school A, that child goes to school B, influences the behaviors of children in school B, and you expel 10 of them. And
they just spread.
Then they just spread. I believe the government must come up with a policy. If you have a problem with a child under drug abuse, you're supposed to deal with it at that school, you and the parents, and don't expose that child to the other schools, because the circulars are there. They say continue. I can read the statement here. It says continued indulgence in that results to expulsion and exclusion, where you're not even allowed to join any other school in the country, and then you're thrown in the street. But as a country, as a government, have we done the best there? We haven't. So we need to revisit our statutory instruments and see how we can support the schools in coming up with a possible solution to this whole fiasco.
What do you say to that?
Yes, what the doc is saying, I agree. But in addition to that, yes, it's a national crisis. But also, let's take it from the family's perspective. I heard one of the students saying some of the children or some of the learners, they have the responsibility of taking care of the home while the parent is away. So there is that gap that is created. Of course, we might focus on the issue of how those drugs are being taken into Zimbabwe, but there are some other substances, somehow that are produced here in Zimbabwe that are being maybe turned into those drugs.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is the approach that we are taking is trying to come up with a solution must be community-based, family-based, and school-based. That's what I think.
So currently, as from your explanation, the only approach is expulsion. Like, you are warned once or twice, and if you continue to take these drugs, you are then you are excluded from the school, you are expelled, and you cannot go to another school. Of course, that in itself has its own loopholes, because if we have enough money, we can surely get our student into another school. What would be a more inclusive approach to dealing with it from a school perspective, from the headmaster to the teachers to the peers around them? How else can we approach dealing with such a problem?
I've had serious learners who were under drugs. I think I run a private institution, and I get some of the worst learners from the other countries. I will not tell you a country, maybe here,
it's
just
okay.
for, yeah. They come from different countries, especially the European bloc, and they're into some of these serious kind of drugs. But one thing that I discovered is that basically if you sit down with these learners, you try to establish, because the reasons are so diverse, as I think my colleague here alluded to. They're so diverse, you know, there is because the parents are separating, is because mom was, dad said, mom, you're a fool or something, and then this child is just saying, I'm reacting to this, I'm not happy with this, and, you know, with this whole testing on whether this one is whose child and all these things, you know, people get stressed. But if you sit down with someone and understand that learner, because we must treat the learner as an individual, understand their case, and they must be open enough to tell you, you know, I take drugs, how many? Get to understand that, because all of us say if you see somebody smoking, Manje, for example, you just say, I don't want to see you smoking tomorrow. But this person may already be addicted. And if they are getting to get out of the addiction, what is the replacement? Is it coffee? Are you giving them dandy? What exactly are you doing? Because you need them to work with a qualified person, right? They may recommend certain drugs. For example, they can give you somebody under depression, they can be given a repurposal, where you try to contain the effects. But at the same time, you always remember that something that is chemical may always become a problem, because there will be withdrawal symptoms. You solve this problem by going medical, but the medical route may create several problems. But what I'm arguing on is, let us try to understand the learners and talk to them nicely, and have an agreement that I am going to stop drugs because they have a disadvantage 1, 2, 3, 4, an advantage 1, 2, 3. And the child will say, come to you and say, I took a drug yesterday. And you say, what had happened? What could we have done better? And not just take a shambok and then start chasing somebody who is addicted. They will go and continue taking. So I believe it's a whole change of mindset, where you're supposed to say, this is the real problem that I have. I will not push my daughter here, I will not push her to stay with an aunt somewhere, because you are pushing the problem to aunt's place to the extent that aunt may have problems also. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You want to add on? All right. So unfortunately, we are out of time. So I'm going to ask you two from a student's perspective, and I'm hoping you'll also give me kind of a bit of insight into how you're involved as well in the fight against drug abuse in schools. How can peers start to influence each other more positively, to do things that are more progressive and kind of pull each other away from drugs being a possible solution? Sashli, let me start with you.
As peers, I think that we should really be close to each other so that we tell each other everything, so that when a friend takes the drugs, as a peer, I should try everything that I can to help that peer drive away from those drugs. And also I should get help from a parent or from a teacher to tell them, this person is taking drugs, so can you at least assist me in helping my friend from turning away from those drugs. Also, I really urge schools to be competent enough when it comes to finding a student with drugs. Can I explain in Shona? Because the language is the best. You see, as a parent, mwana ndamusiya pachikoro awenyu antika mabata mwana ane madrugs, alright, ampano kungomudzinga. You are also a parent, so let us meet halfway kuti imimi as the school, inini as the parent, let us both try to at least turn the child away from drugs. And also as peers, we should also form at least clubs or groups together as youth to limit the use of substance among learners as well.
All right, thank you, Sashli. Gordon?
Well, as for me, I would say guidance and counseling would help. People would take it as a subject, but for me, I would take it as we would put it as a group. We'll start a group, would communicate, share each other's thoughts, find a standing ground that we as students would say, no, one of our friends is doing drugs. How best could we help him? No, rushing to inform the teacher in some cases would worsen them. Some teachers have short temper. They would rush, expel the students, as they said. But as a student, as people, as parents, as Ashley said, we have to stand in one ground and find a better way to a person's life, to ensure him with a progressive life, to make sure that each and every person who comes into that institution of learning comes out with a progressive life.
Thank you very much. Tatenda, as an educator, how can we improve the school system to kind of combat drug use, number one, and number two, what lifeline can schools provide for students who are on drugs or find themselves on drugs and need help?
Yeah, the best way that we can do to combat the drug abuse in schools, we all have a role to play. The teachers, they have a major role to play because they spend much of the time with the learners. And also the parents themselves, they need time with the children. For us to know the behavior, the character, or any manner in which the student is moving, it really means that there are two people. It's either the teacher, like what Dr. said earlier on, or the parent. So if the teachers and the parents come together and work together towards a single goal, I think we will win. But the situation which actually happened is only the teacher. The teacher only see the movement of the student when the student is at school.
Right.
But example, maybe the parent comes home 8 o'clock in the evening and the child is dismissed around 4:30, 4 o'clock.
No one can account for the time.
Who can account for the time? And that's the time which is dangerous for the child.
Right.
There are some other parents who do not even know where the children are learning. In the diaspora, there is no other adult who is local who can take care of the children. So if the parents show much love to the child, I think the gap can be bridged.
Okay.
And also, from the community, because those students are also coming from school, going to the community. In the communities, we need those social clubs.
Right.
In those social clubs, let there be psychologists, counselors, not only focusing, maybe if it is a football club or a netball club, not only focusing on the sport, but also focusing on the character of the children that are there. I think if we move along that line, we can combat the use of drugs.
Okay, and my second question on the lifeline for students who
You
are
can come
on drugs.
again. You can come
Okay,
again.
so my second question had been, what lifeline is there for students who find themselves on drugs for whatever reason, but they acknowledge that they need help? What can they do? Where can they go?
Okay. With the little experience that I actually have, I think traditional rehabilitation processes are the best. We have a number of students that we have helped. We operate from the high density area where the use of drugs is said to be more prevalent. Yeah, but there is other youth centers that have been created. For example, we have the one in Chitungwiza, that Safe Haven Trust, where they are dealing with the primary cause, not only taking the child to the rehabilitation center where they deal with maybe from the medical side. They deal with the problem, and also educating the family on how best to deal with a person who is taking drugs or who has now been addicted. So I believe there are also maybe women network centers where learners or even some other adults who are sitting there. Also, we need vocational centers in our areas that we live, so that those some of those school leavers can go, maybe trained car mechanics, sausage making, candle making, etc.
Right.
I think it will take us a long way.
All right, thank you very much. And in conclusion, same questions to you, Doc. How do we, first of all, as schools, how do we do better at stemming the infiltration of drug use and abuse, and also what lifelines are available for students that need to get off drugs?
Thank you. I would like to emphasize the fact that the schools should try by all means to identify change in behavior, and as soon as they identify that change in behavior, measures must be taken to make sure that the learners under such conditions are given counseling and not labeled. We don't want to label these learners. We don't want to beat them up. We don't want to exclude them, but they must be given a lifeline where they are supported within the school. And some of the worst cases have to be taken to hospital. Even Pararenyatwa, we've got the psychiatric unit, which is there. The doctors, I think, can recommend that a child may be put under that so that they can then try to remove the drugs from the children. So the most important thing that we must also remember is that it's so stigmatizing, and some of the learners may want to actually continue because they've been labeled that. So you call them drug abusers, they want to do it more so that really you are very sure that they are abusers. So I think the most important thing is to welcome them, to accept them, and then carry on the process of trying to ensure that they get out of it. And also the pastors, the churches need to play a role. My schools must be having pastors, these chaplains who come in, talk to the learners, give them the word of God, encourage them that they're created in the image of God and that they've got a brighter future. We promise them a better future, they'll be able to withdraw out of it.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you so much to all my guests who have been part of the discussion today. For you who has been watching, thank you for joining us. I hope you have been dropping your comments, and we will, of course, be looking at them and giving some form of feedback. This is an ongoing discussion, and we do appreciate all the input that comes in, especially from the audience, because you do give us some insight that we may have overlooked. My name is Candice Mokalele, from myself, the crew behind the scenes at ZTN. Be kind to each other, but be kinder still to yourselves. We'll see you next time.